Well, I know that people have been anxious to hear the follow-up to the series you began last week on China's role in the New World Order. Before we begin, Bishop, I always like to let everyone know that they can follow you on Twitter. How do people find you on Twitter? Is it Global Spiritual Revolution on Twitter?
No, the my Twitter handle, Jason, is at Bishop L Gators. Again, at Bishop L Gators, Gaiters. There you go. And also my Facebook handle is the same acronym, which is facebook.com/Bishop L Gators. And we also have a Facebook page as well by just simply typing in Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
And it's a good way for people to keep up with all the different things you're doing on social media and elsewhere. People can see your iHeart Radio link, and of course, they can hear your radio show on Life Radio NJ/Gaiters. It plays every Thursday, and people can support the Bishop's Global Spiritual Revolution by going to paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. Bishop, what have you prepared for us this week?
Part two, Jason, of China, the Contagion of Global Manipulation. Again, part two of China, the Contagion of Global Manipulation. I just want to go over again some of the key talking points that we started last week, just in case some of your listeners were not privy to this information. Quickly, we talked about the historical name, the etymology of the name China in Sanskrit. It reveals the word Sina or sin, capital C-I-N-A or capital C-I-N, which is rooted in the royal family of the Chu dynasty, all right, capital C-H-U, which means state expansion, okay, which also means the power of the belt. Now, we talked about the Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative, and we talked about some of the 10 to 15 nations that are really being decimated, Jason, by COVID-19. And many of those nations are a part of the European Union, who have either rejected the Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative or backed out of it altogether. So those nations, according to the COVID-19 global cases by the Center for Systems Sciences and Engineering, that simulation map, it shows real-time information that right now, Jason, the United States is leading the world, okay, according to this John Hopkins simulation, that we have over 164,719 cases, and that is to be disputed. So we talked about China going back 3,000 years, covering 5 dynasties, 10 kingdoms. And the term China or Sin or Sina means also the power of expansion, or the power of the state. We know China is a state-sponsored entity of terrorism. Even through COVID-19, this is nothing more than a political tool of manipulation trying to gain global economic power. We talked about China during their imperial time period between 221 BC to 1912 AD, and according to their time period of the Republic of China from 1912 to 1949. But we also talked about, Jason, every president within the history of Chinese politics going back to 1912, even to this day with President Xi Jinping, are all interrelated by blood, going back to the Chu dynasty, the Han dynasty, with the financial backing of the Li dynasty in China. The Li dynasty, capital L-I, is one of the 13 Illuminati families, which represents one of the Knights of the Round Table. Okay, so China, this contagion of global manipulation is being used by the deep state to discombobulate, to destroy the financial system, what you and I call capitalism here in the Western Hemisphere. We talked about President Xi Jinping, again, being of the bloodline going back to the Chu dynasty, all right? When we also talked about some of these Chinese secret societies, okay? And you may mention last week on last week's flyer that the Chinese Masonic Temple number 525 that's located in Hong Kong. That is the Zetland Lodge 525. And just also found out in my studies in preparing for you on yesterday, Jason, that the entire cabinet of President Xi Jinping belongs to this Zetland Masonic Lodge. I'm going to come to that in a few minutes. So
now,
the entire
Bishop, sorry to interrupt you very quickly, but I need to alert you that the streaming service that I utilize is currently experiencing a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service. I don't know if you or our viewers are familiar with this, but the intended purpose of a DDoS attack is to overwhelm the computer server with nonsense requests so that the proper information can't get through. And unfortunately, right now, our broadcast is being hindered by that. We are going out live on Crowdsource the Truth 2, but our main channel with almost 100,000 viewers, as well as the Global Spiritual Revolution Radio YouTube channel, are currently not playing the live stream. So what we'll do, Bishop, is you and I will continue the show, and after it's completed, I can go through a variety of methods to try to rectify the problem. But it's very interesting to see how this cyber attack is trying to stop independent news from bringing forward information that counteracts the mainstream.
This is not by accident, Jason, because when you and I, as truth seekers and a part of the awakened community here in New York City and around the world, the deep state were constantly tried to block information so that the people cannot be awakened through that specific information. So to a lot of your listeners, the Grand Lodge of China, which was founded in 1949, okay, so the Grand Lodge of China also occupies some of the most politically astute Chinese politicians even to this day, here in the United States as well as in China. And so when we get into these secret societies, okay, going back to the book by Dr. W.A. Pickering entitled Chinese Secret Societies and Their Origin. Again, Chinese secret societies and their origins. It talks about the Grand Lodge of China. It talks about the Zetland Lodge 525 in China, okay? It talks about that President Xi Jinping also is a part of the Royal Asiatic Society of China in Shanghai, which is an Illuminati bloodline secret society, okay? The Royal Asiatic Society in China, in Shanghai, China, along with the triads, we made mention of them last week, being the underground network of the Chinese mafia, interconnected to the Chinese bloodline of not just the Chu dynasty, the Han dynasty, and the Li bloodline, even to President Xi Jinping. That's the Royal Asiatic bloodline secret society in Shanghai, China. Like I said a few minutes ago, from 1912, with President Sun Yat-sen, even here in 2020, President Jinping, they're all related by blood, going back to the Chu dynasty, okay? And so the Chinese secret societies, okay? Now we talked about the CEO of the company Alibaba. And mind you, the term Alibaba is not a Middle Eastern terminology. The term Alibaba is more of a Eastern Oriental lexicon word, which means open sesame. And the term open sesame means like abracadabra or abracazam. So these are witchcraft terms, another topic for another day. And we talked about China being this global contagion of manipulation. where the Chu dynasty, over a period of 2,000 years, and thank you for bringing up that picture of Jack Ma. Now, Jack Ma, not to get away from the Wall of China, Jack Ma was heavily connected to the late Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, the face and the ambassador of both the Alibaba Corporation in China and a online casino betting corporation by the name of Fun 88, capital Fun88. So Fun 88 is ran by a British gangster by the name of Joe Lewis, capital Lewis. Excellent pictures there,
But
Jason.
Bishop, is that the guy's real name, Joe Lewis? Isn't he a famous boxer?
Well, no, this is a different Joe Lewis. That
But
Joe
I'm
Lewis
saying,
is as the boxer, right? That's capital Louis. This Lewis is capital Lewis. Thank you for keeping me on my toes, Jason. So Joe Lewis, the owner of Fun 88, had contracted and hired Kobe Bryant a few years before his death to be the ambassador, the face of the online casino betting system in China. Now, Fun 88 is ran now by the Triads. So Kobe
wow.
Bryant was connected to both Fun 88, Joe Lewis, okay, Daniel Levy, okay, and Alan Sugar, all a part, okay, of the Khazarian Empire that runs Fun 88 with the backing of the Triad Mafia organization,
Now,
okay?
Bishop,
This
may I
is
ask you this? Is
go right
this
ahead.
is this Anne Hathaway standing with him?
To my knowledge, no, it is not Anne Hathaway. You know, it's interesting. I've had a multiplicity of people since last week asking me, is this Anne Hathaway? Now, according to my knowledge, I might be wrong. According to my research, that is not Anne Hathaway. So yeah, and if I'm wrong, I will definitely come back next week and apologize to your listeners. But according to my research, that is not Anne Hathaway. But that's an excellent, excellent analysis there, Jason. So this Fun 88 that's heavily connected into the criminality system incorporation of the triads. So then to understand China, the contagion of global manipulation, I am not talking about the Chinese people. I am talking about that demonic regime in Beijing. And then the term Beijing, when interpreted into the Coptic Egyptian text, means state of manipulation or manipulation. Okay, so China, the contagion of global manipulation. Now, getting back to the Great Wall of China, the bloodline of the present day president of China, President Xi Jinping, his bloodline goes back to the Chu dynasty, which built, along with the Han dynasty, the Great Wall of China, which took them over 2,000 years to build. Okay. Now, we talked about, I believe, a few months ago, Jason, concerning the opium wars in China from 1839 to 1860, which established Western imperialism in Indochina. Okay. And we know that the Sassoon family out of India bankrolled the opium war, the drug trade. And the Sassoon family, their great descendant is the late Vidal Sassoon, the billionaire hair care magnate. So then China now in 2013 is politically and financially, Jason, invading the West under the pretext of investment in trade through the Silk Road and Belt and Road Initiative. Now, to your powerful listeners, Jason, if they get an opportunity, type in mapping the Belt and Road Initiative, mapping the Belt and Road Initiative, or the Belt and Road Initiative's progress. When you look schematically on a map where each country is connected, that map is shaped like a dragon. So in the book of the Revelation of St. John the Divine in the Bible, the Apostle St. John prophesies, there you go, Jason, prophesies of the coming dragon, okay? We're not talking about the Chinese people. We are talking about the regime in Beijing. So then in Revelation, John talks about and prophesies of the army coming from the east, which were number 200 million. Now, you know that getting here in the United States, Dr. Tony Fauci, who is closely connected to the World Health Organization and is great friends with the president of China, President Xi Jinping, had said that there could be a possible number of infected people, Americans, going up to 200,000, okay? And I'm going to reveal this in connection to Event 201 here in the next 5 minutes. It gets really, really powerful here. So then China, through the Belt Road Initiative in October 2013, President Xi Jinping travels to Pakistan and Indonesia in order to initiate a global plan of world domination through the disguise of this Trojan horse, okay, called One Belt, One Road, or Silk Road Initiative, or the Belt and Road Initiative, which 126 nations, Jason, initially signed up to be a part of, so that these nations in the Middle East, throughout Europe, throughout the panhandle of Africa, could receive billions of dollars of aid from China in exchange for what? For political influence. So then, according to the book, Dragons Along the Silk Road and Beyond by Illis Flynn, okay? He talks about the history of the Silk Road Initiative and the Belt and Road Initiative, which goes back during the days of Genghis Khan. So many within the bloodline of not just the Chu dynasty in China, but many citizens of which totals around 1.4 billion people in China, Jason, also go back to the bloodline of Genghis Khan. So China, being this contagion of global manipulation, is using this initiative, Jason, to create what I call Chinese satellite states, just like Joseph Stalin did right after World War II at the Yalta Conference, when the Western powers of the United States, of France and England, along with Russia, in Europe, in the East, was carving up Central, Eastern, and Western Europe post-World War II to see what nation would control which specific European continent. And now the Chinese are doing the same thing that the Soviets did in occupying 6 to 7 Balkan states like Russia did, okay? We're talking about Romania. We're talking about Czechoslovakia and Poland, okay? And Luxembourg. Now the Chinese have, through the Belt and Road Initiative, 64 nations. Well, what happened to the 60 other nations that initially signed up for this initiative, Jason, back in 2013? They saw through the political facade of the Chinese in an attempt by Beijing to establish some of these European nations as Chinese satellites, okay? So again, there is a term, the term here, Silk Road, was first coined in 1877 by German historian Dr. Baron von Richthofen, capital R-I-C-H-T, Hofen, when he talks about the Silk Road goes back to the Roman Empire in 30 BCE. And when you say BCE, we're talking about before the Common Era. It goes back during the Byzantine Empire between the 6th and the 14th centuries. But it also goes back during the time of Genghis Khan, okay? So then China being a global contagion of manipulation. Now, like I said a few minutes ago, Jason, Going back after World War II, it was Joseph Stalin who established Russia as a major superpower during that time of establishing satellites of Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, in through the 1945 Yalta Conference, where he also establishes 15 Soviet states. Now, China, through this Silk Road Initiative, has 64 countries throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, and throughout some of the oceanic countries of the world. Those specific countries, my friend, are not touched by COVID-19. Now, a lot of people might say, well, Bishop, you're stretchy. I am not. Again, when you go back to that worldwide simulation map put out by Johns Hopkins University, and by the way, we know that many Mike Bloomberg gave billions of dollars to Johns Hopkins University 2 years ago to establish the Bloomberg Center for Physics. Right. And that's another topic for another day. So then now the Chinese are establishing Chinese satellite states and countries in the form of a Soviet Comecon system, capital COMECON, which simply means Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which was birthed in 1949 and, of course, was destroyed in 1991 because of the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, quickly here, as we continue to dissect China being a contagion of global manipulation. Now we have 64 countries, okay? 64 specific countries. Now, according to the World Health Organization, going back 2 weeks ago, there are 164 nations, Jason, that have been affected by COVID-19. Isn't that interesting? So you have 64 nations that are a part of the Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative. You have 164 nations infected by COVID-19, according to CDC. And this Event 201 that was financially backed, not just by Bill Gates and through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but the Event 201 was also subsidized by George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. Give me 10 minutes, I'm going to expose Event 201. Because in July 20th, the date of July 20th of last year, okay, now from July 20th to December 31st is 164 days, according to a leap year. So that's 164 days. So July 20th of 2019 is the 201st day of the year. Remember, Event 201. And from July 20th, without the leap year, to December 31st is 164 days, Jason. But there are 164 nations that are infected, affected, and controlled by COVID-19. What am I saying? The deep state specializes in synchronization. They synchronize, okay, as David Hawkins said, death betting. They synchronize through chronology or timeology what countries would be affected or infected by COVID-19, which brings us to Event 201. Now, before we get to Event 201, the BRI, okay, the Belt and Road Initiative, is the largest infrastructure project since the Marshall Plan, okay? Now, as we move on here concerning China being the contagion of global manipulation, through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is connected to COVID-19, covers 3 continents, Jason, which compose of 60% of the world's population, 40% of the global GDP, the gross domestic product. Now, President Xi Jinping has a political handprint upon 40% of the global GDP on this planet and 60% of the world's population, which Russia and China, though they have a low number of COVID patients, but they're not in actuality, Jason, being touched by this virus. Why? Because they are in bed with the Chinese politically and financially. So then, as a side note, China was warning France because France was excluding China from gaining access to 5G networks of the fifth generation of bandwidth networks, which I believe is interconnected to this COVID-19.
Many
Now,
people have been
also,
saying that, Bishop, that the microwave energy of 5G technology is what's causing people to get sick when they're exposed to COVID-19.
exactly. And the hospitals here in New York City, I have a lot of doctor friends who are saying that the president is being lied to because a lot of these hospitals are actually not overrun or overran with COVID-19 patients. I'm going to come to that in relation to that New York Times op-ed article concerning Elmhurst Hospital, which is nothing but a lie. So then China being this contagion of global manipulation. And just kind of going over the foundation from last week, just in case some of your listeners were not privy to that information. Now, when we examine the detailed listing of nations, again, according to the simulation map through Johns Hopkins University, nations like Italy, Spain, Germany, Iran, France, Switzerland, the UK, Austria are being hit by COVID-19 because they have fully rejected, Jason, politically and financially, the initiative of the Belt and Road Initiative plan. So there are nations that are not infected on the level like we are here in the United States and in Italy, like Russia, many of the African governments and nations in Africa, including Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. They're really not touched, including Yemen, by COVID-19 because they are in political alignment with China and with the Silk Road Initiative, okay? So as we move on here quickly here, and this is really getting into some powerful information as we continue to dissect the foundation of China, the contagion of global manipulation. So then now China has 64 satellites, okay? Now, because of the Silk Road Initiative, okay? Now, remember we talked about COVID-19 being of a U.S. patent number, and I sent you that link last week. And just in case some of your listeners were not privy to this information, now concerning Kobe Bryant being connected to this, Kobe Bryant was a part of Fund 88, which was controlled not only by the Trads, but by Beijing. Kobe Bryant had visited in 2017 and 18 the Wuhan district in northern China and the Guangdong district in southern China, where he hosted a number of Nike clinics, especially near the Wuhan Institute of Virology, okay, and the Wuji Tech Institute, which is a subdivision of the Wuhan Institute. Guess who owns many of the shares in both the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Wuji, capital W-U, capital X-I, Pharma Tech, George Soros, through his Open Society Foundation.
I was going to guess Bill
so,
Gates, but you beat me to it.
And Bill Gates as well. And both George Soros and Bill Gates subsidized Event 201, including Mark Zuckerberg. I'm going to come up to that in about 5 minutes. So in 2006, the Chiron Corporation, capital CHIRON, had patented a virus called SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. And we call it COVID-19, not because it came out in 2019, but because this is the 19th strand within the family of the SARS virus. Each strand, Jason, not only has an application number, but each strand has a specific patent number. I can't stress this enough. This is demonic. Each strand not only has an application number of that link I sent to you last week by the National Center for Biotechnology, but also each of the 19 strands of the SARS virus, which make up COVID-19, has a specific patent number. Now, in 2006, Chiron, which no longer exists online, was sold to the Novartis AG group out of Basel, Switzerland. Okay. Now, the Novartis AG group owns over 2,500 subsidiary pharmaceutical companies throughout this planet, 3 of which were being sued by the late Kobe Bryant. The NSAID Therapeutic Corporation, capital INSYS Therapeutics, which owns the Acorn Incorporation, capital AKORN, which owns high-tech pharmaceuticals. Why was Kobe Bryant suing these 3 entities, which are all used to be owned by a billionaire by the name of John Kapoor, who is serving a 66-month prison sentence because he was lacing these weight loss pills with opioid substances. But Kobe, who was scheduled to go to trial the following Wednesday had he lived, was also going to sue the Novartis AG group because they were financially backing the NSAID Therapeutic Corporation, Acorn Incorporated, and high-tech pharmaceuticals. And now the Novartis group, Jason, owns a 33% stake in the Hoffman LaRouche AG company. LaRouche is capital LA space, capital ROCHE. Now, they own Novartis a 33% stake. There's that number 33 when it comes to degrees in order within Freemasonry. So Hoffman has 2 distinct divisions, diagnostics and pharmaceutics. Diagnostics, they create the bioweapon, and pharmaceutics, they create the cure or the vaccine that is supposed to remove the bioweapons. So then it is Bill and Melinda Gates, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, including George Soros and his open source society. Now, if you go on the Event 201 site and type in or go to the exercise team, which are the key players. Now, mind you, some of the key players that took part in this exercise, Jason, was the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, okay, which are also members of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia.
Bishop, very quickly, I just wanted to say, I've been looking at this Event 201 quite closely lately. I've looked through this list of key players, and I've been watching the videos that they have posted online of the event. I believe many of these people who are the key players were actually innocent victims who did not know really what they were being invited to. If people watch the videos of Event 201, for me, Bishop, they're very reminiscent of like one of these Agatha Christie type murders where a bunch of people get invited to a house for a party and then they realize they've been trapped in a bizarre plan where people start, disappearing or something.
Absolutely. And I agree with you 100%, Jason. Many of these key players that came from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And mind you, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has a simulation program called CONTAGION, okay? Crimson Contagion. I'm going to come to that in a few minutes. But a lot of these players that took part in this live exercise at Event 201 in October of last year here in New York City were members of the Center for Disease Control, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, okay, who are actually innocent and had no idea what they were a part of. Now, if you go on that Event 201, and mind you, from July 20 of last year to the end of the year on December 31st of 2019 is 164 days. So from July 20th to December 31st is 164 days. Now, according to the Secretary General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, who is closely tied to the World Bank and also to the Bank of China financially, who is also kissing the behind of the Chinese. I'm talking about the Secretary General of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom, who is also close friends with Dr. Tony Fauci.
And so diabolical in his own right.
Yes. Dr. Tony Fauci does not want the president to lift the ban on the American economy, while China, who unleashed the pathogen last year, they're going back to work. The companies, the plants in China are going for speed ahead. Let me get this. So they unleash the pathogen, okay, COVID-19, then their companies go back to work in China, but yet the American people who are the victims from their victimizers, the Chinese, are in a stalled financial situation. So then, according to Event 201, okay, so July 20th of last year is the 201st day of the year. And from July 20 to December 31st, 2019, is 164 nations, 164 days. From July 20th of 2019 to December 31st is what? 164 days. Now you have 164 nations, according to the Center for Disease Control and according to the WHO, who are infected with COVID-19. Now, somebody may say, well, Bishop, that's accidental. Nothing is by accident. Now, according to the website, centerforhealthsecurity.org, centerforhealthsecurity.org, /event 201/about. When you go at the bottom of the page, Jason, under the heading of exercise team, okay, the last sentence says, and I quote, Event 201 was supported by funding from the Open Philanthropy Project. Who owns the Open Philanthropy Project?
Definitely
Not
Soros.
only George Soros, right, but also Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook.
Wow.
So you got Mark Zuckerberg, and give me about 5 minutes because I'm going to break down this Open Philanthropy Project, which is actually started with Open Society Foundation money from George Soros. We're not just talking about Bill and Melinda Gates. We're also talking about this Open Philanthropy Project, which is heavily subsidized by the major players of Facebook, and namely Mark Zuckerberg. So then when we talk about China, the global contagion of global manipulation, and mind you, remember last week, quickly, that I broke down the word pharmacy, which comes from the Greek word pharmakia, which means witchcraft, potion, divination, okay? So the term pharmacy, pharmakia, pharmaceutical, which also means alchemy, alchemist. So Bill Gates is an alchemist, okay? George Soros is an alchemist. And some of this may say, what are you talking about, Bishop? I'm saying that Bill Gates, okay, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and George Soros through his Open Source Society, Foundation are planning a total takeover of the Western Hemisphere through the system of depopulation, through
Wow.
pharmakia. And so then, now remember the scriptures in Matthew 15:22, when I said concerning the terms a devil, which transliterated into Persian means advil, pharmakia, or Galatians 5:20, the word seditions means sedative, pharmakia, pharmacology, pharmaceutical, China, the contagion of global manipulation. Now, before we get back to event 201, you and I made mention, that China is the most powerful police state on earth that has over 200 million cameras, okay? Now, there is a individual, Jason, that came up in my studies earlier on this past weekend, a man by the name of Moshe Greenspan, who is working closely with the Chinese regime in Beijing. Now, who is Moshe Greenspan? He is a young man who owns a company called Phase 6 LLC, okay, out of Las Vegas, Nevada. So then, Phase LLC specializes in simulation and face recognition software, simulation and face recognition software. So on his website, face6six.com, they also own a division called Church X, capital CHURCHIX, okay, which specializes in simulation and facial recognition software for churches. Wait a minute now, for churches, for pastors, they can recognize when a person joins their congregation through this software, through Phase 6 LLC and Church X LLC, under the leadership of a former Mossad agent, Moshe Greenspan, okay? Now, according to a lot of historians, now I cannot substantiate this, Jason, so I don't want anyone to be running with this. There's a rumor out now that this Moshe Greenspan is related to Alan Greenspan.
That's what I was going to ask you, because when I just Googled him, Alan Greenspan came up, but maybe Greenspan is not that common of a name. Let's take, there he is. Does he look like Alan Greenspan?
And so we don't know. And, you know, there's a rumor, and I don't go by rumors. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist. I teach by facts and data. So Moshe Greenspan could be related to the former chairman of the Fed, the Federal Reserve System, Alan Greenspan.
Let's just take a quick look at that, Bishop, and let's see if these guys do maybe share any kind of familial resemblance. It's hard to tell if he's his uncle or something.
Exactly. And this Moshe Greenspan is closely connected to Jack Ma of the Alibaba Corporation, which the Alibaba Corporation, with the help of Moshe Greenspan and Phase 6 LLC and Church X, is distributing millions of dollars worth of data of facial recognition software through simulation to the People's Republic of China. Why? Because they want to create a contagion of global manipulation. China has more street cameras than any of the 206 nations on the face of the earth. Why? Because China is a police state. They specialize in digital footprinting. They specialize in AI technology, body scanning, geo tracking. According to the 2018 World Intelligence Congress, which was sponsored by Alibaba, along with the backing of Moshe Greenspan and Phase 6 LLC, which now Moshe Greenspan is helping Chinese intelligence with facial recognition software, and through this subdivision called Church X, where here in the United States of America, many Christian pastors are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to Moshe Greenspan to establish a facial recognition software for churches. Because now pastors are saying we have to know through facial recognition software, those who are sex offenders are on the sex offenders list. So in other words, through this Phase 6 LLC corporation in Las Vegas, they are creating a deep state psyop, not only in American Christian churches, but throughout the world, but more specifically in Beijing, China. And I have to say this also, Jason, we talked about that this China contagion of global manipulation, they have established an online application bank loan process through what they call their national social credit system. That if you and I will apply for a home loan or a car loan, depending on how long it would take you and I to fill out that application, it would predetermine whether you and I would be qualified. If you and I have a low credit rating within the system of China, it would prohibit you and I from traveling, even outside of our district or province. So this is China, the global contagion of global manipulation, okay? And mind you, the Chinese own $1.7 trillion of our debt. So quickly here, now we're getting into the body of the text,
Bishop,
what we're talking
may I point something out about this Phase 6 before we move off of this? They've got a drone technology as one of the applications for their facial recognition, which identifies criminals and civilians from a drone's camera. They've got a typo. This should have an apostrophe, but it's for government and private uses. So this seems to indicate that private use, you could just fly a drone around and identify criminals. How does a robot determine who a criminal is? I thought we're supposed to have due process and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, not a facial photograph that decides you're a criminal.
And see, this is the problem, and I absolutely love your analysis from, I believe a couple of days ago, you went to the Elmhurst Hospital. Now, there is a huge op-ed, right, I think from last week in the New York Times, concerning this Dr. Colleen Smith. Her native language is Russian. Now, it begs the question, is that her real name, Colleen Smith? Now, I'm not accusing her of being a part of a plot, to manipulate the numbers of those who have been infected with COVID-19. But her native language, Jason, is Russian. She is a simulation doctor, okay? Now, I've been getting information. I have a close connect, a friend of mine who works for the Times. I cannot say her name, but I will provide you that information after we're off the air today. She said, and I quote, that Dr. Colleen not only violated the HIPAA Act, but she was not authorized by the powers that be at the hospital to videotape the ER unit, and that she's closely tied to the mayor, to the governor, and also to Black Lives Matter. She's a major contributor of Black Lives Matter. And again, this cannot be substantiated, but I have a close connect, a source in the New York Times, saying this Colleen Smith is also a supporter of Me Too. Now, mind you, I'm not castigating this Dr. Colleen Smith, but she is lying concerning the lack of ventilators at the hospital. And she's also lying, Jason, about the number of patients who have died. Now, in this New York Times op-ed, she is saying that there are bodies in body bags wrapped in freezers and on trucks, but that could not be substantiated, okay? So she is a part of the Health and Human Services Contagion Crimson simulation, okay?
Contagion Crimson simulation, is that the name of a simulation?
Yes, well, put out by the U.S. Health and Human Services, okay? So they call this exercise crimson contagion or
Oh,
contagion crimson. Oh, there you
oh,
go.
Bishop, because I was watching the Event 201 videos over the weekend, and I was struck that one of the conclusions of the Event 201 simulation was that they needed a more realistic simulation to prepare for a pandemic. Now, this is published by NBC in Chicago. It's important to note that Dr. Colleen Smith did her undergraduate work at the University of Chicago. And you know, Bishop, I wasn't going to get into this necessarily, but if we can take a moment, I'd like to share with the audience private messages between myself and Dr. Smith. May I show you those for a moment? So,
Wow.
after several days of rebutting my story publicly with tweets that essentially supported her existing statements, I think I had put sufficient pressure on her based on the number of views from the videos and the tweets that she felt the need to respond. And so she said to me, I won't be doing an interview. Getting into a public argument never helps anyone. Now, mind you, Bishop, I initially contacted her because I wanted to straighten out the discrepancy between what the hospital was saying and what she was saying. I wasn't presuming that she was lying. I wanted to try to help resolve the situation. She says it isn't a simulation. What we are seeing on the ground is not what the system is saying. Isn't that a very interesting statement from her right there? It's kind of
That
vague.
is, Jason, you are such a great journalist, my friend. You are a real journalist. I can not, not these people on the crack news network and NBC and ABC. See, she's hiding, Jason. Okay, she is a simulation doctor who also got her training, Jason, at the Johns Hopkins University's Simulation Center, which
Huh.
is backed financially by many Mike Bloomberg.
Right.
So Colleen Smith, whose native language is Russian, and mind you, she may not be a Russian. And if she was, it doesn't mean I'm not trying to implicate her in any type of conspiracy. But why would she interview with the New York Times without the authorization of the Elmhurst Hospital and then go in with unauthorization to videotape patients, which is against HIPAA laws?
Hmm.
What was her plan? In other words, trying to make the president look bad.
Can
Her
I just
part
share
of her.
with you a few more of these? Because there's some important things that she said. So
Mhm.
we carried on the conversation shortly, and I told her that she's raising valid points. These are valid questions that should be addressed. I understood you wanted to speak to the press. Why will you not do an interview? She said that she's refusing an interview because she expected an argument or whatever. But then she says the New York Times reported what I told them, and it was a true look at a hospital on the ground, a true look at a hospital. That's some fuzzy language right there. But she said, I will not do an interview for two reasons. One, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. People need to learn how to use apostrophes for the possessive form of words, especially doctors and people who should be smarter than that. But she is trying to change people's minds. And she also said her employer has asked me not to. And as they are working very hard to make things better, I will comply. Now, I want you to take note, Bishop, she's writing this on Sunday and at
Uh,
9:49 a.m. Now, earlier that day, 60 Minutes Australia had re-released a video of her. Now, it's possible that they just took that from the New York Times, but it's my opinion that large companies like this that broadcast things all over the world are very concerned about getting sued when they use material that they don't have explicit permission to use. This is another reason why I think there's a big problem with this video recording in the ER. Even if the doctor is not violating HIPAA laws, as she asserted, I think the New York Times lawyers would be very sensitive about the different people who are in the ER who might choose to sue them. So she says the employer is making things better. I say, you mean the employer who directly contradicted your claim prior to the New York Times running the story? So you're okay with being manipulated by the New York Times to gaslight the world? I would say that is a violation of your Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath implores doctors to do no harm. You were willing to risk losing your job to provide footage to the New York Times in violation of HIPAA laws. That's according to multiple MDs I've discussed this with, not me. But now you're afraid that speaking the truth might get you fired. That does not compute, Dr. Smith. And then I also told her that writing all these DMs was taking more time than it would take to just talk to me. She replies, "I'm done." To which I say, "That's the first thing you've said that I agree with. And here's the killer, Bishop. I'm asking you, during the time at University of Chicago, did you study under or interact with Bill Ayers, the leader of the Weather Underground?"
Oh,
No response.
wow, excellent research. Wow, Jason, you're teaching me as well, my friend. Every time I come on your show as part of the crowdsource of the Truth family, I'm learning something every day from you, my friend. And it's interesting. She had talked to the New York Times, and to your listeners, they can just type 13 deaths in a day and apocalyptic coronavirus or COVID-19 surge at a New York hospital. Now, she talks about in this op-ed this simulation called Crimson Contagion. Okay, Crimson Contagion. Now, your listeners can go to Wikipedia, and this Crimson Contagion that she says she was activating this simulation that has, which was created by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from January to August 2019, the period of 7 to 8 months, where they tested, Jason, the capacity of the U.S. federal government in 12 U.S. states, okay, and New York, the state of New York was a part of this exercise of simulation through Crimson Contagion, which Dr. Smith talks about in that New York Times op-ed, in order to respond to a severe influenza pandemic, which is nothing more than a plandemic, okay, originating in China. And it goes on to say here, Crimson Contagion, that the exercise involves a scenario in which tourists returning from China spread this virus, okay, respiratory virus or SARS in the United States, beginning in Chicago. Bill Ayers, beginning in Chicago. In less than 2 months, the virus will infect 110 million Americans, killing more than 500,000. So, in other words, the Health and Human Services who took part of that 2019 simulation, Crimson Contagion, were also some of the main players who may be innocent that took part of the Event 201 strategy forum here in New York City. So then, in other words, this Event 201, when you go to the Center for Health Security.org, at the bottom of the page, okay, it talks about some of the major players. And let me go through this again, because this is very important, Jason. Johns Hopkins University, okay, the Bloomberg School for Public Health, the World Economic Forum, which is backed with money from the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm going to get to them in a few minutes, okay? Because there's a man by the name of Klaus Schwab, okay? Capital SCHWAB, who is the founder and is the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, got his startup money through the Rockefeller Foundation back in January of 1971.
Does he know Charles Schwab?
That I do not know. That's definitely that's something to look into. To not only to connect Moshe Greenspan to Alan Greenspan, but the question begs the question: is Klaus Schwab related to Charles Schwab? That's an interesting question. Another topic for another day. But the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, okay, through the World Economic Forum and the Open Philanthropy Project, also with George Soros money and Mark Zuckerberg money, had hosted and subsidized this Event 201 simulation conference or exercise. Now, again, I cannot stress this enough as we're talking about China, the contagion of global manipulation. The Open Philanthropy Project, as a part of the Open Society Foundation, okay, as a part of this simulation project of Event 201, financially subsidize this Event 201. Now, again, I'm not blaming Mark Zuckerberg for anything. What I'm saying that this Open Philanthropy Project with George Soros money, okay, also was financed by Facebook co-founders Dustin Moskovitz and Mark Zuckerberg, okay, through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So wait a minute now. So Event 201 has key players: Bill Gates, George Soros, okay, Dustin Moskovitz, Mark Zuckerberg, who had started Facebook back in 2004 and 5. So there was a man by the name of David Plouffe, capital Plouffe, who is the former campaign manager for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign run, is the director of policy and advocacy for the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative that also financially backed the Event 201 scenario. Mark Zuckerberg and Dustin Moskovitz, who got their startup money to start Facebook back in 2005 through a billionaire by the name of Peter Thiel, capital Thiel, who is connected to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, he's the creator of Palantir, Bishop, which is a like a precognition, pre-crime. They're trying to use quantum computing and artificial intelligence to predict criminal behavior.
Minority Report with Tom Cruise, precognition. So this person here, Peter Thiel, who also started the QTEL Corporation, okay, which is heavily backed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay.
Did he start in QTEL?
QTEL. Well, he's one of the founders. He's one of the principal founders. He's not the main founder of QTEL, but one of the principal founders. And by the way, QTEL is located, if they have not moved, in Arlington, Virginia.
That's something different. QTEL is different than in QTEL. I wasn't aware of this.
Yes, QTEL, absolutely. And so the Wall Street Journal, including Fortune magazine, going back to 2011, Fortune magazine, if you can just type in timeline where Facebook got its funding, timeline where Facebook got its funding, it's in the January 11th, 2011 op-ed in Fortune magazine. And I'm shocked that Fortune magazine, being a far left magazine outlet, would even expose Facebook. That it talks about that with financial backing, okay, from this Peter Thiel and the QTEL Corporation and other CIA-created capital venture corporations, okay, like the Accel Partners Group, capital ACCEL, who in 2005, Jason, gave Mark Zuckerberg $27.5 million of startup money. So Accel is a CIA venture capital front, along with QTEL, which gave $12.7 million through the hands of Peter Thiel to Mark Zuckerberg back in 2005. So Peter Thiel, who is also one of the financial backers of Event 201, gave Mark Zuckerberg $500,000 in 2005, gave him an additional $12.7 million, okay, in May of 2005, along with the Accel Partners Group, capital ACCEL, which gave an additional $27.5 million, and the Greylock Partners Institute, Greylock Partners, in April of 2006, which is also a CIA venture capital firm. So in other words, Facebook got its start money with CIA money. And then Mark Zuckerberg, along with Dustin Moskowitz, okay, through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, also backed the simulation exercise of Event 201, which is all connected to Chinese money, China, the contagion of global manipulation. Jason, my assignment is to connect the dots. Okay, so this is the reason why the mainstream media is kissing the behind of the Chinese. Now you got the Secretary General. I'm excited today. You got the Secretary General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, who is praising the Chinese, was praising the Chinese back in 2019, of December 2019, including last month in February 2020, stating that the Chinese is the model country that handles pandemics. Wait a minute now, let me get this straight. The Chinese, I'm not talking about the citizens of China, I'm talking about the Chinese regime unleashes this antigen, this pathogen, this pandemic through the psyop of plandemic. And then the World Health Organization, with the financial backing of the World Bank, which was created by the Rockefeller Foundation post-World War II, is praising China. Jason, it's all demonic, okay? So then, getting back to Event 201, it is financially subsidized by George Soros, Bill and Melinda Gates, okay, with the attendance from those from the Center for Disease Control, okay, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, who created the simulation, okay, last year, entitled Crimson Contagion, or Contagion Crimson, okay, a simulation going back to August of last year. In other words, Jason, they predicted this plandemic slash pandemic from the very beginning. Now, I've been getting a lot of emails for the past week stating this Dr. Tony Fauci had predicted this back in 2017. Go ahead, Jason. You was getting ready to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, Bishop, when you mentioned that Crimson Contagion, I found this thing which looks quite clearly like somebody has uploaded it from their phone. This is a PDF document here. It's on the New York, int.nyt.com. That seems like some internal server at the New York Times. I don't know if this has been published, but the thing has got draft do not distribute printed all over it, and it's talking about Crimson Contagion 2019, which also took place in October, which is the same time frame in which Event 201 took place. And frankly, Bishop, it's the same time frame in which COVID-19 started appearing elsewhere in the world.
Is it? And again, Jason, I keep beating a dead horse every time I come on your show. You got the most astute listeners, my friend, I have ever been a part of, whether it's radio or podcast. So this Crimson Contagion is a dry run. It is a simulation.
I would add one more thing, Bishop, because the gentleman who introduced you and I, David Hawkins, he frequently speaks about the Jerome Lemelson patent, whose function is to switch an exercise into a live fire event. So the question becomes, was Crimson Contagion switched midstream from some exercise into an actual live event to the extent that some of the participants may not even know?
And you know what, Jason, like you said 15, 20 minutes ago, I believe a lot of the participants in the Event 201 simulation conference, those from the CDC, those from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, okay, are innocent people, pawns in this global psyop, in this global conspiracy. And mind you, let's connect the United Nations to the World Bank, to the World Health Organization, to the Security Council of the UN, to the Economic and Security Council of the UN, to the Trustee Council of the UN, okay, through the International Court of Justice of Peace, which is in The Hague in the Netherlands. So then, going back to 1920, the League of Nations was started by Woodrow Wilson with the financial backing of the Rockefeller Foundation through John D. Rockefeller. Okay, right after the World War I event. So after World War I and World War II, you have the creation of both the League of Nations on the 10th of January in 1920 with Rockefeller Foundation money, as Woodrow Wilson was the face of the League of Nations, which becomes the for the 1945 creation of the United Nations through the Rockefeller Foundation money. So the League of Nations in 1920, okay, and now 25 years later, the birth of the United Nations with 193 to 197 member states through Rockefeller Foundation. And mind you, the logo, the insignia of the old League of Nations is a 5-pointed pentagram. Okay, we talked about Kobe Bryant some weeks ago. Pentagram, pentagon, hexagon, a 5-pointed pentagram, which was and is the insignia of the old League of Nations.
Actually, now, Bishop, it's a pentagram inside a pentagon.
Look at that. Oh, wow. Repeat that again, Jason.
Well, take a look. It's a pentagram. It's actually a pentagram inside a pentagram inside a pentagon. So that's 3.
You see, this is how the deep state thinks. You talked about precognition, cognition, post-cognition, through problem reactionary solution, where the deep state creates a crisis to bring a traumatic effect, to the psychosis in the cognition of the masses, that forces the masses through this cognition exercise to give up the God-given rights for the counterfeit system of safety and security. Thereby the deep state, who created the crisis, provides the solution that they already had in the beginning. Now that pentagon, or pentagram within the pentagram within the pentagram. So then through the League of Nations, the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, the Economic Council, Trustee Council in China, these are demonic deep state layers that are a part of this, this COVID-19 that has been unleashed upon the world. Again, the Rockefeller Foundation, okay, and part here, and I got to read this here too, Jason, because a part of the preamble of the Rockefeller Foundation is to create a utopia for all humanity. Really, by what? Through depopulation.
Yeah.
So the Rockefeller Foundation, in conjunction with the United Nations today, in the financial backing of the World Bank that serves the Chinese, but is run by the Rothschilds, now through the World Health Organization, is supporting the Chinese efforts to control this pandemic. Wait a minute. So then now you got those like Joe Sleepy Crit sniffing Biden, okay, Barack Obama, they're all kissing, excuse my French, the behind of the China. I don't understand, Jason. The World Health Organization, we, the United States government, we give more money to the World Health Organization than all of the other nations combined, but yet the World Health Organization is blaming President Trump for this pandemic. It's all an international game. Now, like I said last week, not the Chinese people, my friend. I believe that the Chinese regime in Beijing must be brought to the legal court of The Hague, which will never happen, okay? Because the United Nations, in connection to the World Bank, in connection to the WHO and the CDC and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, through Operation Crimson Contagion, that is now taking place as we speak. So, in other words, when we talk about China, okay, the contagion of global manipulation, and mind you, one of the most powerful revelations that I'm going to reveal to you, and that you already know, and we talked about this several weeks ago, this term here, solve aid coagula, capital SOLVE, then ET, then coagula, capital COAGULA, which means to dissolve in order to rebuild, to dissolve. So, what the deep state wants to do in order to resolve an overpopulation problem, they want to, through COVID-19, dissolve through depopulation certain sections of this world in certain continents in order to repopulate those areas with their royal Illuminati bloodline. Now,
And Bishop, I think
remember,
you probably know this already, but the internet is telling me that salve e coagula is a maxim or motto of alchemy, which I believe is also witchcraft.
exactly. It is a model of witchcraft, and it's also on the forearms of the Baphomet
All right.
picture by Elias Levi, right?
Right.
So the Baphomet picture, okay, created by Elias Levi. So this Baphomet contagion, this pathogen called COVID-19, there you go, that on the forearms of this global beast is solved through coagulation, or we must depopulate or dissolve a certain population in order for the deep state to repopulate that population. It all goes back into layers, just like the logo of the League of Nations, a pentagram within the pentagram within the pentagram. Remember the writer J.K. Rowling, okay? On her forearm was solved
Right.
a coagula.
Right.
Remember the forearm? Yes, a couple of weeks ago, J.K. Rowling, all right? And so J.K. Rowling is also a part of this alchemy, this divinational system of solve coagulation, to dissolve in order to solve a problem. That goes back to the League of Nations logo, okay? It's a system within a system within a system. Now, let's go further here. This gets really, really deep now, Jason. So then, when we talk about China being a tool of global manipulation, Event 201 is a precursor to the United Nations Agenda 2030. So the UN Agenda of 2030, my friend, is the time scale which the deep state has established for the total control of not just America, but the entire world. Last year, the Democratic Party, through Nancy Jezebel Pelosi, okay, and little Chucky Schumer, was trying to pass legislation called HR 1111. So through HR 1111, we're talking about China, the contagion of global manipulation here. So through HR 1111 is a policy where the left is trying to pass through the Senate, which President Trump would never sign. It's a policy, Jason, that will give over the sovereignty of America to the United Nations.
Wow.
That's demonic. You see, HR 1111. Now, back to China and their connection to not only Event 201, but the United Nations 2030 agenda. So the UN's 2030 agenda is an agenda where they have a blueprint for the global enslavement, Jason, of humanity through corporate masters of the Rothschilds, okay? the Oppenheimers, the Rockefellers, okay, the Warbirds, the creators of the Federal Reserve System going back to December 2013. These corporate masters belong to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, the Committee of 300, the Hidden Hand. They want to, through this Crimson Contagion exercise, through Event 201, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Source Society, George Soros, through the Open Philanthropy Project, to control the earth, to dissolve it, coagulation through depopulation by providing us a vaccine for COVID-19.
This is what I wanted to ask you, Bishop. Did you see this thing about Bill Gates calling for a vaccine that includes a computer chip that would be injected into everybody so that they could track who has been vaccinated and who has not, and that the chip would be an RFID chip that would go into people's hands? And I'm sure this is something you know much more about than I do, but I've been seeing now videos and things around the internet saying that this chip inserted in your hand is the mark of the beast, and there's something in the Bible that talks about when you're marked by this thing, something is going to happen.
You see, the mark of the beast, again, you hit a powerful nerve with me, as you always do, Jason. When we talk about the system of 666, okay? When we talk about system of 666, in relation to COVID-19, in relation to Event 201. Now, you taught me something here that I didn't know concerning the goal of Bill Gates is to not just create this chip, but to put it into the body of every person on this earth, to track them, and also to be, this is a part of this computerized vaccine system. And if I was advising the president, I would highly suggest to him, don't take any vaccines from the Chinese or from the World Health Organization, and not from through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because it's the vaccine that's going to kill us, not COVID-19. So, but the 666 system is also connected to the number of the skulls and bones. And there is a number that keeps popping up, this number of 322. Now, this number, when you look at the insignia of the skulls and bones, okay, which was founded at Yale University by Alfonso Taft, okay? Now, when you look at this number here, 322, which is the number that goes back to 322 BC, to the Greek orator Demosthenes, okay? Now, Demosthenes in 322 BC was also one of the original writers of the Athenian Constitution during the time of Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. Now, in my studies, Jason, I'm thinking, what does Demosthenes have anything to do with skulls and bones? Because Demosthenes, according to Greek Hellenistic history, was not only a great orator, but also was a major proponent of child pedophilia and child trafficking, even during the Greek Empire, going back to 322 BCE. So Demosthenes was not just a great orator, but one of the writers of the original Athenian Constitution, was also a target. Demosthenes was a target of King Philip II of Macedonia, who wanted to destroy child pedophilia and child trafficking within the Greek Empire because of not just Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, who were also practitioners of pedophilia, but also the King of Macedonia, King Philip II, wanted to prosecute Demosthenes because he was involved in child trafficking and pedophilia. This goes back thousands of years, Jason. So 322 is in relation going back to 322 BCE, before the Common Era, to the Greek orator Demosthenes, which that name Demosthenes is composed of two Greek interpretations. Demos means demon, and thenes not only means theocratic, but means society. So Demosthenes means a democratic or a demonic society, okay, or a demonic theocracy. So Demosthenes was heavily involved in child pedophilia and child trafficking. So then also the number 322 in relation to the skulls and bones, that number 322. Now there is an op-ed article on the Xinhunat website, capital IXINHUANET.com, or just type in 322 COVID-19 patients discharged from hospital on Chinese mainland. Now look at the number now. And people might say, well, that's by accident, or no, nothing's by accident when it comes to the global contagion of Chinese manipulation. 322 COVID-19 patients discharged from hospital on Chinese mainland. That's an
And it's
op-ed.
released, Bishop, on the 30th of March, 3/3.
33. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the Novartis AG group owns a 33% stake in the Hoffman LaRouche pharmaceutical industry or corporation in Basel.
And Bill Gates just gave a speech the other day where he said there was going to be an increase at a rate of 33%.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Wow, Jason. And I guarantee you, this, what we're going through now, is what I call a soft World War III simulation.
It's World War III.
It's not a hard, it's a soft World War III simulation. And after this is over, there's going to be another new entity like the League of Nations post-World War I, like the United Nations post-World War II. And when we're done with this war, there's going to be a brand new entity put out by the United Nations or by the world powers. Watch and see. But also this 322 in history, it talks about the battle of the Echinades, capital ECHINADES, okay, whose bloodline is also connected not just through Indo-India today, okay, but going back to the Chinese government, going back into Chinese history, okay? Again, I'm not castigating the Chinese people. What I'm doing through great articulation, Jason, is connecting these dots, okay? And especially on 322 BCE, not just Demosthenes, who's connected as the face of the future skull and bones, okay? But also in 322 BCE, there is the Muryan Empire dynasty, capital MAURYAN, okay? The Muryan Empire dynasty in 322 BC, which also moved its forces to the Chinese, to central China during that time in 322 BC. Oh, that's interesting. 322 skulls and bones, 322 COVID-19 patients. This is from the March 30th op-ed. In 322 BCE, the dynasty called the Muryan dynasty, capital MAURYAN, from India, which also transferred the power base also to China in 322 BCE, which brings us to the skulls and bones of 322. So it's all connected to this COVID-19, to this simulation of crimson contagion or contagion crimson, that they had already practiced, Jason, prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. So this is China, the contagion of global manipulation. Again, getting back to the World Health Organization. Now, on the website, civilian network.ca. Now, if you get an opportunity, Jason, go to civilian network.ca, and it gives real-time information, links of the connections between Bill Gates, the World Health Organization, George Soros, okay, to the Secretary General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, capital Adhanom, that according to an op-ed in the Financial Times, February the 9th, 2020, or just type in WHO chief splits opinion with praise for China's virus fight. WHO chief splits opinion with praise for China's virus fight. In other words, the Secretary General of the World Health Organization, along with the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, is praising the contribution of the Chinese to fight against COVID-19. Wait a minute now, but the pathogen was unleashed by the Chinese.
Yeah.
Why are they kissing the behind of the Chinese? Because they're in cahoots, Jason. The United Nations, the World Bank, the WHO, okay? Along with this Dr. Tony Fauci, this little midget demon, is in cahoots with Dr. You see, now I feel like preaching now. We're in connection to this Dr. Tedros Adhanom. Yes, he is a little midget demon. Along with this little woman, Dr. Burke, they're all in cahoots because they don't want Trump to be reelected. They want Trump, okay, out of office by hurting him politically, by telling him, do not lift the ban on the American economy. But the Chinese went back to work. But they're the ones, Jason, with the help of the World Health Organization, unleashed this pandemic. And it was Dr. Fauci 3 years ago who had predicted this pandemic or plandemic concerning COVID-19. So then the UN, through the World Bank and the World Health Organization, created this plandemic of this simulation exercise through Event 201. Now, the 201st day of the year is July 20th. And from July 20th to the 31st of December is 164 days. 164 nations are infected with COVID-19. Nothing is by accident when it comes to the sequencing of time, dates, and simulations through the deep state. So then, the World Economic Forum, getting back to them, Klaus Schwab, with Rockefeller Foundation money. And you can go to weforum.org/organizations/the Rockefeller Foundation. In other words, through the Rockefeller Foundation, they are subsidizing not just Klaus Schwab, okay, who may or may not be related to Charles Schwab, okay, financially backing the World Health Forum in this Event 201 simulation conference back in October of last year. Some of the key players from the CDC, from the WHO, from the U.S. Health and Human Services, through Crimson Contagion, also with the financial backing of the Open Philanthropy Project, in conjunction with the Open Society Foundations, George Soros, okay, Dustin Moskowitz, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, also are financial backers of simulation and depopulation. So then, through this Crimson Contagion depopulation or simulation project, 12 U.S. states took part of this simulation going back to August of last year. One of those states is New York State. Now, as we move forward here, boy, this is powerful here, and we're almost done, Jason. So, according to the Wall Street Journal, okay, in the August 30th op-ed, August 30th, 2016, or just type in the CIA's venture capital firm, like its sponsor, operates in the shadows. The CIA venture capital firm, like its sponsor, operates in the shadows. And the text talks about the financial backers, like I said about a half hour ago, that gave financial capital to Facebook, okay, including the QTEL Group, which is a venture capital firm out of Arlington, Virginia, funded by the CIA, okay. Also, another company, Jason, by the name of the Forterra Systems Incorporation, capital FORTERRA, Forterra Systems, and that company, Forterra Systems, they specialize in, get this, virtual reality and global simulation. So, for Forterra Systems, the QTEL Incorporation, all backed with CIA money, that specialize in virtual reality and global simulation, are the financial backers of Facebook going back to 2005. And Facebook, through Mark Zuckerberg, okay, in the Open Philanthropy Project, also subsidized the Event 201 last year, okay? Now, it gets more ugly here, Jason, as we're talking about China, the contagion of global manipulation. Now, you may mention of a word of cognition or precognition. Now, there is a term, Jason, that I want your listeners to really examine, okay? That term is neuroplasticity, okay? Again, that term is called neuroplasticity. Now, one may say, Bishop, what does neuroplasticity or precognition, cognition, or postcognition have anything to do with COVID-19? This is all a part, as we talked about, the U.S. Health and Human Services Contagion Crimson Program, or Crimson Contagion Program, to prepare the United States for this pandemic. So the term neuroplasticity, it simply means that the human brain, Jason, grows into the shape of what the individual is thinking at that moment. Oh man, let me say this again. The term here, neuroplasticity, is a scientific term, which means that the human brain, Jason, grows into the shape of the thought that the individual is thinking at that moment. So when we are going through the pandemic of COVID-19 through problem reactionary solution, so because of this cognition that we also call neuroplasticity, which means that the human brain grows into the shape of what the individual is thinking at that moment. This is Event 201. This is through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. This is through George Soros's Open Source Society and the Open Philanthropy Project, where they practice precognition, cognition, which creates a pathogen or a contagion of fear, okay? So China, the contagion of global manipulation. So again, to your listeners, Jason, the term neuroplasticity, that term is always used by Bill Gates. It's always used by George Soros in relation to the deep state. So that's a term, neuroplasticity, which simply means, Jason, that the human brain grows into the shape of what that individual is thinking at that moment. Okay. You talked about cognition and cognition. So then the psychic, the cognition of America through neuroplasticity. Why are the American people in a panic where you can't find any hand sanitizers, 90% are made in China, that you can't find any mask or elastic gloves, 90% are made in China, because it is of this precog contagion of fear that you and I call neuroplasticity. So the neuroplasticity in relation to China, the contagion of global manipulation, neuroplasticity, Jason, and this is deep. It means that the human brain grows into the shape of what that individual is thinking at that moment. So that if we're thinking fear, then the anatomy of the body becomes that of a fear, pandemic. This is what the deep state is doing, Jason. So then, in my conclusion, China, who is a contagion of global manipulation, and the Event 201, sponsored by Bill Gates, okay, sponsored by George Soros, sponsored by Dustin Moskowitz and Mark Zuckerberg through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, because they are proponents of depopulation and backing the George Soros Fund and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of this Event 201. And Jason, again, when you go to civiliannetwork.ca, again, in my conclusion, civiliannetwork.ca, it gives links, real-time information where George Soros, get this, and Bill Gates are major shareholders in both the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Wuxi Pharmatech Corporation, capital W, capital U, okay, capital XI, capital W, capital U, capital S, capital I, Pharmatech Corporation, okay? Now, my friend, guess the address, the number address of the Wuxi Pharmatech Corporation in Wuhan, China.
It's going to be 322. Oh,
Goldson, 666, capital GAOXIN. There's your 666. Now, somebody may say, well, Bishop, that's by accident. No, nothing is accidental, Jason, and nothing is by chance or random when it comes to China being the global contagion of manipulation. So the Wuhan Institute and the Wuxi Pharmatech Corporation and AppTech is located at 666 Goexin, capital GAOXIN, and Goexin is a Chinese acronym for the term goat. You and I talked about goat riding a month or two ago, another topic for another day. So the Wuhan Institute, which is the epicenter of Chinese military biological power, is heavily financed by two Americans.
Wow.
Who are traitors, Jason? Bill Gates and George Soros, who also financially backed Event 201 going back to October of last year. Wow. So, Jason, in my conclusion, this is demonic, my friend. Again, I'm getting a lot of emails as we speak. People are telling me that they are being blown away, Jason, by this term neuroplasticity. And they're asking me to break this down again in relation to the Crimson Contagion dry run simulation. So neuroplasticity is a scientific term to your listeners and students, which means that the human brain in cognition becomes the very shape of what the individual is thinking at that moment. So the deep state are practitioners of both fear and manipulation, where they create the crisis through COVID-19, in order to force the pandemic of fear so that the American people and world citizenry can give up their God-given rights for the counterfeit system of safe and security. And now they're going to try to force you and I to receive a vaccine that the deep state creates. See, Bill Gates needs to be in prison.
I agree.
Soros needs to be in prison. And
Absolutely.
there are underground, and I know this sounds crazy to your listeners, Brother Jason, there are underground shelters and homes that these billionaires have built decades ago because they see a worldwide pandemic coming that they financially back and instituted. And at the same time, we are being lied to, Jason, as to the true numbers of this contagion, okay? And the financial, I can't stress this enough, Jason, the financial backing of both Twitter and Facebook, or Facebook and Twitter, is by the Central Intelligence Agencies, venture capital groups like QTEL, like Forterra Systems, okay? And all of these other venture capital funds, like the Excel Partners Group, capital ACCEL, and the Greylock, capital GREY Lock Partners Group, all backed by CIA venture capital money to start not just the simulation of COVID-19, but the simulation and the pandemic of fear and manipulation through social media. Because the term media, Jason, is rooted in the term medium, which means witch in the Bible. Medium, witch, media, okay? So this is part two. I don't mean to preach today, but I'm so excited about this short series on China, the contagion of global manipulation. Again, is all a part of a global UN 2030 plan to depopulate through dissolvement, getting back to solve coagulation, which is also on the forearm of not just Baphomet, Homet, which means system of darkness, but also is on the forearm of the writer J.K. Rowling. Why? Because they're a part of this pandemic through a pandemic to dissolve the masses of the people through vaccine in order to repopulate those areas around the world. And the only place on earth, Jason, as of today, now it may change tomorrow, but the only place on earth who is not being touched by COVID-19 is Antarctica. Antarctica, back during the time of the Third Reich, was investigated by the Nazi regime. See, the Nazi regime, not to get away from China, the contagion of global manipulation here, part two, but the Nazis, the scientists, yes, they were evil, yes, they were demonic, but they were geniuses, because many of the Nazi scientists, through Operation Paperclip, a security agency, okay, helped build the FBI. I'm talking about former Nazis now, also helped build NASA to decode through meticulous research and impartation or teaching to your people the layers, just like the League of Nations logo, these layers of darkness within darkness within darkness, okay? This is the contagion of global manipulation, which gets back to the scientific terminology of neuroplasticity, that the human brain and mind grows into the shape of what that individual is thinking at that moment. And you talked about precognition, cognition, post-cognition. So the cognition of the deep state is not to protect the American people. The cognition of the deep state is to fully weaponize their power over humanity so that they can enslave us at their will. That is China, the contagion of global manipulation.
Incredible, Bishop. This has really been one of the most compelling shows we've done. And I mean, we've done some great ones. So thank you for that amazing research. And we've had so many viewers. You know, the viewership of Crowdsource the Truth is increasing. So that's good, because it means that all the information that you share here is going out to even more people. And I'll tell you, Bishop, it's very interesting to see who comes in here with an open mind and who comes in here with the intent to disrupt what we're doing. I hope that people are taking notice, because there were some social media personalities who were trying to distract from your message, and people should think for themselves why someone would want to do that. If they don't like what we're saying, they can tune out. But to try to cause other people not to listen certainly means they're trying to hold the message back. And Bishop, I think you've revealed some incredible connections today. We got to continue looking at this Dr. Colleen Smith. I don't have any direct evidence that she was lying, but it's my feeling that she wasn't being completely upfront with me, that someone who had nothing to hide would have directly communicated with me earlier in the process before I had to put more pressure on her. This is what's happening now, Bishop, is that there are these doctors out there who, you know, somebody shows up and says they're a doctor. I think most people are going to inherently presume that that's a good person who's trying to do the right thing. And I'm not trying to equate other doctors in the news to the person I'm about to mention, but in the example of Dr. Mengele, let's say, not exactly a nice guy, although he probably had knowledge of medical science at the time that was on par with the best medical doctors around. So we need to look a little bit more into these people. There is a doctor in social media right now who is a PhD, but he presents himself as Dr. Paul Cottrell.
And see, you know what, Jason, you hit a nerve with me. There are people, even in the church, who say that they are a clinical psychologist or that they are a Christian psychologist, and they have no PhD, my friend, which means they have not been board certified by their specific state. So it's a lie. And to your listeners, real quick, to read about the bio of Dr. Colleen Smith, whose native language is Russian, which means Colleen Smith may not even be her real name. And like you said, Jason, we're not trying to indict her. We're just trying to get to the truth. So when you type in Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital, and this is an op that goes back to March 29th, a few days ago, March 29th, 2020, or just type in "We Are the News." Okay, "We Are the News." "We Are the News." Or beside it, Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital, and that is on the website where the capital WEARETHENE.ws, or just type in "We Are the News." Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital. Now,
it's funny, Google's not bringing it up. Let me try DuckDuckGo.
Yes. Type in WEARETHENE.ws/notable.
Wait a minute, you lost me there, Bishop. We Are the News.
Dr.
We Are
the News. We Are the News, and it has a long link there. But in short, just type in "We Are the News," and then right beside it, Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital. And I had to really fact check this at least 5 to 6 times, and it's true. In other words, it just gives a quick bio. And like you said, Jake, we're not castigating her or indicting her. Yeah.
Give me the direct URL again, Bishop. I'll put it right in.
Yes. It is WEARE, okay, THEN, like in no, .ws/notable/92937. Okay, so Yeah, Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital. Um,
It's not,
so,
it's just so difficult to find. It's unbelievable.
yeah,
Someone is trying to prevent us from finding this because the
yeah,
New York Times crap comes up right away.
yes. I'm going to send it to you here, but it talks about the background
Oh, yeah,
of
just message
and
it in
her,
Skype. That'd be perfect.
yes, yes, yes. So then it talks about the background of this individual, and again, Jason, like you and I are saying, we're not indicting Dr. Smith, and I don't know her, but the thing is, when you type in Dr. Colleen Smith in works at Elmhurst Hospital. Now, her background is very interesting because her native language is Russian. Okay. Uh, Her native language is Russian. Now, that doesn't mean that she is actually from Russia. And it doesn't mean that she is some type of a Russian bot or agent. It just simply means that her native tongue is Russian, and so it talks about here, and let me type this in here on my phone so I can send it to you. I was going to email it to you, but I will definitely send it to you. So then, here we go, right there. So Dr. Colleen Smith works at Elmhurst Hospital, and let me get the link here. So as we're talking about that, so then you went to the hospital the other day,
Yes.
and you were asking people, and it seemed like some of the workers really, the few workers did not want to talk to you, Jason. Did you get the feeling about that? Did you get the
Well,
sense that they did not
absolutely.
want to talk
And
to you
that's
about what's going on?
understandable. They don't want to get in trouble. There's a lot of security at the hospital, but they definitely did not want to talk to me.
Yeah. So then I'm trying to send this to you now. I got it on my laptop. I can email it to you, but let me
It's
get
amazing
to
how difficult it is to find on this website. It's like
it's
whoever's running this
crazy.
website.
Um, So then, as we're into this today, and I have to confess to Jason, this is one of the most powerful broadcasts I've ever been a part of, and especially during this specific series on China, the contagion of global
But
manipulation here. So let me send this to you
you know
because
what? I
I
found it somewhere else, Bishop. We've got it here from U.S. News and World Report, which is actually good because if people don't believe
oh
we are
good.
the news, we've got this about Dr. Colleen Smith. She's an emergency medicine physician in East Elmhurst, New York, and is affiliated with New York Health and Hospitals in Elmhurst. Received a medical degree from Emory in medicine, has been in practice between 3 and 5 years, speaks multiple languages, including Russian. So she's
Yeah.
quite educated, but that would definitely, speaking Russian, I don't know, does that mean that she's into Marxist stuff and hanging out with weathermen like Bill Ayers when she's at the University of Chicago and participating in simulations? I don't know.
And you know what, Jason? And like you said, you and I, we have an open mind, and we're not, again, indicting Dr. Smith as being some type of a Russian agent. Okay, what we're saying that her theories of this pandemic or plandemic at the hospital, where people are in body bags, in freezers, and trucks, and then saying at the same time that the hospital doesn't have any ventilators, and for her to have the temerity to videotape patients, like you said, that's against HIPAA laws, my friend. And
Yeah.
so, but who is she? Who is she? I mean, who is she connected to? And why the hospital can be liable for this, my friend, and videotaping patients? No,
Yeah.
that's against the law here.
Well, we've also seen video footage of people allegedly loading bodies into a truck. So, I mean, we've got all these medical workers who are so insensitive to the rights of the patients, the deceased, their families. I mean, this is totally inappropriate. I don't know how these hospitals could be hiring people who are so irresponsible. But, you know, Bishop, earlier this morning I was watching Governor Andrew Cuomo's press conference, and it was interesting. We were reading the direct messages I was having with Dr. Smith, but I didn't go into the tweets that she was putting out publicly to counter the message that I was putting out. And in those tweets, she comes out of nowhere and says, "This is not a simulation. This is not political." Now, I hadn't mentioned anything political. I was just wondering why the New York Times and, Colleen Smith were saying one thing, while the hospital and the governor were saying another. So I've been saying for a week that it makes a lot more sense to me, if we're having a medical emergency, that we should first do the most expeditious and effective things that can help save lives quickly. This is the very essence of triage. It doesn't make sense to me to spend a week planning and executing the build of an emergency hospital at the Javits Center when it would take 13 minutes to drive a patient from one hospital to another and start alleviating the overcrowding at one particular hospital, because that would only be a crisis if the story is every hospital in New York City is full, and this one in Queens is at 140% capacity, and people are dying as a result. What occurred to me this morning in watching Andrew Cuomo's press conference, where for the first time I heard him talking about things that I've been talking about for over a week. He said, the city and the state need a plan for emergency contingencies to sort of merge the public city-run hospital network and the privately owned hospital network so that people don't die over matters of policy and money. The governor went on to say that these city-run hospitals, they generally don't want to send patients to other hospitals because having a patient in the hospital means money for the hospital, and a light bulb went ding. So this is why we have so many patients at this hospital, despite the fact that there were 5 to 10 ambulances waiting outside and numerous hospitals within New York City that obviously weren't overcrowded. So, Bishop, I want to thank you for an excellent broadcast today. We're going to continue to dig into this developing situation here in New York and around the country. I want to remind our viewers that they can listen to your radio show, Bishop, on liferadionj.com/Gaiters. And viewers of Crowdsource the Truth can support your global spiritual revolution by going to paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. And I hope our viewers will sponsor your efforts generously, because you are obviously going to great lengths and doing a lot of research to create an excellent show here for Crowdsource the Truth viewers, and I know that people appreciate it. If people are watching the show each week and enjoying it, the Bishop and I are committed to providing a show free of cost here on YouTube for as long as YouTube will allow us to do it. But of course, the show can't be made without your sponsorship. So please visit paypal.me/GSRR Media Group and support the Bishop's effort. And please also become a sponsor of Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You're going to get access to a huge and continually growing library of sponsor-exclusive content that's only available to sponsors on Patreon and Subscribestar. Coming up tonight, we've got another episode of More Pain with True Pundit editor Mike Moore. Bishop, I'll see you next week. Stay safe and have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for watching, everybody.